out here tonight. It's a beautiful summer-like evening, which is what you hope for, and when you're having an event such as this. The program committee is very pleased to present one of Ashfield's favorite citizens, Hope Packard, who's going to be speaking on the buildings in Ashfield that have been moved through the years, and I'm sure it'll be a very enjoyable speech.
I discovered when I got back in it near the lake, so we have to find that's not a very good picture of it. Now I've had a lot of fun with this, and I'm not sure of some of the dates as yet. So if anybody has any questions, they can look it up themselves. The first building that I know of that was moved was the early Congregational Church, which is down the east side of Bellis Road. And it must have been moved around 1765, and they moved it up on what we call the plain now, and it's sat just about where Mrs. Henry Hall's monument is, in the plain cemetery. The second building that I can find any record of, at least it's a rumor, in the town history it says that it is rumored that the Mitchell Tavern was later moved over to be Ziba Smith's house in Baptist Corner. Well, Ziba Smith comes from a famous tribe of Smiths who were ardent Baptists in their days, and old Killian, the forerunner of the group, decided that he didn't want to pay taxes to support the Congregational Church, as was necessary in those days. And so he appealed to some friends of his in Boston, to a friend of his in Boston, who sent word over to the king in council, and he was excused from paying that tax. Now, the other story about it is that my great-grandfather told my father that there was also a story that Killian waited for winter, and when there was plenty of snow on the ground, he hitched up his horse to his sledge and put a couple of barrels of hard cider on it and went down and corrupted the legislature. I suspect that story was right when the congregation was covered there. Now, I figured that if Killian had ways of doing things, that if Ziba wanted the Mitchell Tavern, he probably got it too. He was either a grandson or a great-grandson of Killian. And when I was coming up the Baptist Corner Road not too long ago, I thought, well, there's a way they could get that Mitchell Tavern down. Because the two mowings, the Cranston mowing and the Gray mowings, come right together, halfway up the hill. And the Mitchell Tavern sat fairly near the Cranston house. So I figured they got it down there, and they got it down to the well, I better tell you first where Ziba Smith was. Ziba Smith's house was just on the left, just before you get to the Baptist Corner Cemetery. And it was there's a beautiful double terrace there. And when I was still a young girl, that building was still standing, and we always called it the Ziba Smith house, so I think that must have been the Mitchell Tavern. And if they took the Mitchell Tavern down that slope there, they would soon come to Factory Brook, what we call a Factory Bridge, over that little bridge just to the end of Willie Gray's mowing. And that building, that brook had an old woolen mill on it. And they took that old woolen mill and moved it up Barnes Road and out a little ways out Bailey Road and set it up on foundations there. And when I was a little girl, my great-grandfather lived in it. The foundations are still there. Not all of them, but around the two sides. Now I'm going to ask Russell Fessenden to read the account of the moving of the first Congregational Church, which became our town hall later. It was so detailed, I thought I would never get everything straight, so he's going to read what there is in the town history about it.
Most of you have already read this, but let me repeat it for tonight's talk. The job of moving the town hall was given to a Mr. Tubbs of Springfield. And this is the key paragraph that tells about the operation. The contract with Mr. Tubbs was made about April 1st, but as it was late spring that year, the moving could not begin until May 15th. As the house was built facing the east, the building was built facing the east, it could be started straight ahead. It proved to be a much heavier building than Mr. Tubbs had supposed. That's an understatement, I'm sure. And his apparatus broke down several times and had to be replaced. At no time could it be moved without raising up the back so that the whole house would pitch forward. The house was taken straight across the old road south of John Sears' barn. That must be Jonathan Sears' poison.
Yeah.
And into the road again at the turn. As anyone can see, it would take a large amount of blocking here to get the house across the hollow, and the moving committee had to hustle around for more. Here Mr. Tubbs went on strike and said he would go no farther with it unless the committee would furnish a team to move the blocking. This they have not agreed to do, but they finally bought a pair of oxen, Mr. Tubbs agreeing to furnish the driver. The oxen were kept in Mr. Moses Cook pasture, which then came to the road and included what is now Charles Bassett's mowing lot. In going down the hill, it was found necessary to hitch on a big load of stones to keep it from going too fast. When it had arrived at the place where it was to stand, the contractor was going to leave it on the blocking pitched downhill, and the committee had to give him $80 more to put it on the foundation. People now living who saw the moving think the building inclined 3 or 4 degrees from the perpendicular and was very noticeable. Reverend Willard Brigham was the minister at that time and did what he could to encourage the work by preaching many fervent sermons from texts like this, quote, "And the Lord said unto Moses, speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward."
Now, all the accounts that I can find about the moving speak of 48 yoke of oxen. I've heard it estimated anywhere from 25 to 48, but I haven't been able to find it in a contemporary account. You see that Mr. Howes doesn't mention, and I'm sure that there must have been considerable uproar among the farmers if they were asked to contribute 48 oxen to pull that town church down the hill. There's no mention of that having been paid. And I have a feeling that perhaps they didn't use all 48 yoke every time, because that would be, they started on May the 15th after a very wet spring, they said. And I should imagine the farmers have been busy with their oxen on their plowing and their haying, because they didn't actually get it down. It took quite a while to get it down. They didn't open it for worship until the middle of July. But there's no estimate in Mr. House's history of how long it took. And as I say, I'm rather dubious about their using 48 yoke of oxen at any one time. For one thing, they were afraid it would go too fast. And they had to keep moving what they call the tracks ahead of it, the roads that came on. Anyway, if anybody can find the original article, I'd be happy. You couldn't find it by going down to Greenfield and going through the microfilm of the paper if they published anything at the time. Now, the next building that I find that was moved was when Russell Fessman's grandfather came to town. He liked the site where the house was, where our house was, but he didn't like the house. So he sold the house, and they moved it down to where Clayton and Ruth Kraft live now. That was in 1879. Now, that I was going to show you on my map. I did mark a few things here so that I know where I was at any given moment. Now, let me see. The opposite here. Came down didn't go right. That was the original, general idea of where it went. The next building that I could find any reference to is to the mint warehouse, which stood, where they kept all their supplies for the peddlers who went out from Ashfield. It stood originally between the Zachariah Field Tavern and Mrs. Leonard's house. Just how it faced, I don't know. And it wasn't as big a building as it is now. It's our historical society. Anyway, somewhere in the 1870s, or the late 1860s, the early 70s, they moved it over on Main Street. And not long after that, it was sold to Roswell Church and Asa Waite, who was my grandfather. And I know that my mother lived in it as a girl. And she was born in 74, so it must have been moved before that. Now let me see, we have to move that one too. That went from here over to, not very far around the corner. Will that do for the Historic Association? Yeah. I guess that leaves room enough. It's on the wrong side of the street though. Now, the next one, I haven't been able to find a date on this, and I asked Norma, and she didn't know for sure. But the house, just as you start down Dug Hill, which I still call the Percy House, and I don't know the name of the people who live there now, on the right-hand side, across from Ken Dowling's, was moved from up between the Guilford place and Ted Days' place. And we don't know just when, but this house here, and whether they went down and around on the road, or just how they did it, I don't know. It stopped right by the name. Those are wiggly lines, but maybe you get the idea. Now the next one that I could find anything about, and this, I think that somebody just told me about this one, and I haven't found any record about it, but I suspect it was in the 1880s or 90s. The corner house, a small house on the corner of Brunson Avenue, used to be sat up on the corner on Main Street, and across from Mrs. Newman's. And that, as I say, I have no date on, but that is up here. It was here, it's gone over here. Now, in 1889, I do have some dates on this one. It seems that the old academy sat out in back of Ellen Hargrave's house, between her house and where Mary Fitzgibbon lives now. In fact, Eleanor tells me that her family still call it the playground out there. So I'm pretty sure about that. Now, there was a man by the name of John Field who came to Ashfield in the summer, and he heard that there was considerable upset in the village because the boys wanted to play baseball on the street. They were in the way. So he gave them a field to play on, which is up Pat Collins Road, that end. And I can't remember how many acres he gave them, but he must have gone clear to the street because they used it later for something for the academy. And when he died, his widow gave money for a new building to put in for the academy. So that was she also wanted a museum in it and a library. And the museum things are still some of them in our museum. I remember going into it as a girl. My aunt went to school there, and I didn't see it very much. But the old academy was moved not long after that, probably, and it went up to just this side of Jeff's garage. If you look at it, you maybe see what was the part of the old academy. The center part of it, the windows on each side, and the central entrance is what was either side or added on. And Eleanor says that her father went to school in the old academy in its original position. I think my mother went after it was moved. So there's another move. This one. Up to here. Then it skipped quite a number of years before anybody did anything about moving. Apparently they were all fairly settled at that time. But along about 1921, the Waldens owned a double house out on Briar Hill, and the two ladies of the family didn't get along very well together. So one man sold his section of it to Dr. Ludwig, and Dr. Ludwig had it moved. And there I was able to talk with somebody who remembered the moving, because while Walter Tatro was still alive, I went down one day and asked him if he was in on that job. Why, yes, he says. George Denton was the boss, and he says, I went along to help. And he said, we got it off the foundations and nearly out to the road and found we had to take down a big maple tree. He said, we took down a maple tree, and he said, the black rats just swarmed out of it, and we tore at them with fence posts and crowbars and anything we had. And then he said, we got it across the road, and we went down the road, and that's the Beeman's house now. So it's quite a little distance between there. And I suspect there weren't as many trees in those days as there are now on either side of that road. Now there's some question of which side of the road we went down. But Walter definitely told me they went across the road. And I can't ask him anymore. Then, well, that's out of the village, so we don't have to have it on the map. I didn't try to draw a map for town. Harriet Pike told me that the house that she lives in was moved by M.N. Belling because he thought maybe his daughter-in-law, well, they wanted to put a cellar under it, and there was too much water in the spot they picked out originally, so they moved it over a little further. And they got it so close to the Wing house that Julia Wing kind of complained. She said they were looking right in her kitchen window. Harriet says there are still complaints of that. That was about 1921. And that I want to show on the map because the move wasn't that long. After that, Mr. Belling built a house for his daughter-in-law up on the hill, the one we've had so many people in and out. Now, in 1928, the Bellings gave the park to us up toward the lake, you know, and there were buildings to be moved because there were buildings on that. I don't know exactly in which order they were moved, but I do know that the one that was over by the lake was Charlie Ward moved across the road. Oh, see, it's out in here somewhere. Anyway, it was about in there. I can remember where it sat somewhat, but the lake has changed somewhat since then too. Anyway, but it came right across the road. And then there was an old grist mill there. It was about opposite the end of Bronson Avenue. And most of the grist mill they didn't want to keep particularly, but there was an addition on it, a two-story addition. So Frank Thayer told me this. He said they moved it right across here, and now I know I'll have to refer to a name. You mind if I get
part of Jeff's garage?
Stopples.
Oh.
Ray Stockwell had built a garage here by that time. Here's his garage. And they just took the two-story part of the addition across the fields there, across the brook, and hoisted it up by manpower and various other means, and got it up alongside there. And that's the addition that Mr. Smithers has now for his shop. That used to be the grist mill, or part of it. Now, I think that takes care of the things that had to be. Things that had Now, the next building that I can find a moving date on is Norman Nye's little house. It was an L on the back of where, yeah. She's looking right at me, so I didn't. D. Edwards, where D. Edwards used to live. It was the L on the back of there. And I think that Rob moved it around because his parents had given up farming in Plainfield, and he wanted a place for them nearby. But then, that was in 1939, and also in 1939, they moved the village hall here in South Ashfield. George Denton moved it, and it did sit up here beyond what I call the big brown house, beyond two houses, this third house beyond Connie Rice's, I think, and they moved it down here. That building just keeps on moving. We've got some pictures of the latest move over here that Jonesy brought for you to look at. Now, let's see. The next one is my own house. It was George William Curtis's study out in the back, out in the apple orchard, between O'Donnell's and my place, and sat up sort of above the apple orchard. And the story was that Mr. Curtis, they had so much company over his house and he couldn't find a quiet spot, so he had a building made for himself. And Georgiana moved it over to Norton Hill Road. Now, in 1972, the Peace Girls had a small house up beyond the bigger one which they were using by that time that they didn't want to use anymore. So Morris Day cut it into quarters and brought it down and set it over here in Charlie Day's mowing until they could move it across the bridge. And the Praise live in it now on the Williamsburg Road. But you see, the movers have changed from George Denton to Charlie Day and to Morris Day and now to Stuart Harris and Jonesy. I was interested in buildings that have been moved from other places to Ashfield. I can't put them on the chart because they came from somewhere else. The first one is the Grange Hall. It was formerly in Buckland Center. It was a Baptist church. And they took it to pieces and brought it up and set it up on Main Street in Ashfield. And that is, now let me see, down here. I put a few landmarks on here for me so I know. That's Grange Hall.
Did you give a date on that, Hope?
1870, no, wait a minute. I've got a date is 1869. I don't know where I found it, but I did. There was another house that was brought in out of town, and when Quabbin Reservoir was set up, there were a lot of little houses. Some villages were entirely destroyed, and there were a lot of houses in fairly good shape. And Mr. Gass down in South Deerfield thought it'd be a good idea to move some of them up this way. So he moved a couple of them. One of them is on Parsons Hill, just this side of the big old Parsons farmhouse. It looks real nice. But the other one, unfortunately, got moved here just about the time of the Depression. Nobody wanted to spend money to fix that wreck up. So it sat there for a couple of years, and we all got a little tired of it, you know. All of a sudden, one night, it went up with spontaneous combustion. We had a suspicion that maybe a couple of matches and a little kindling helped, but nobody ever accused anyone.
Where was that going to be placed?
What?
Where was that going to be placed?
Oh, where Dorothy Kraft lived. There.
Huh.
Thank you for reminding me. That was,
Just as you're going out of
Down
town,
here.
before you come to the bank on the hill, before you go to the bank.
well, that's not exact location, it's somewhere near. Now, the third place was the Stockwell House, and that came from the Davis Mines over in inexpensive way of getting it, so he went up to Davis Mines, took it to pieces and brought it down and set it up here. And that is, let's see, get the right location, but it's this side of the old academy. Looks like I've got something twisted here. Yeah, I have. Excuse me. Must be in here. So those were the three buildings that moved in from out of town. Then we have a bunch of schoolhouses that have a history of moving. The first one that I can guess at is the Baptist Corner one. It sat a little further down the road than it does now. And there are still some stones there that look to me like they might be a foundation. That's just a guess. It's just opposite where you go into the Albertsons Drive. Then the schoolhouse out in Apple Valley had quite a history. There were two schoolhouses out there to begin with. There was one at the bottom of Smith Hill, and there was one further up, somewhere near the foot of John Howe's Hill. I don't guess you know what I mean with John Howe's Hill. Kenneth and Gladys lived at the top of it. And the people who were using that one at the foot of the hill decided they wanted it up on the flat above them. So they just went down, I suppose, one weekend and moved the thing up. There's one thing about one room building, it's a little easier to move than things as the town hall. And after they got it up there, they didn't like the exact location, so they moved it 40 rods further west. And then after a while, they decided they wanted it back down foot the hill. So they moved it down here where I think it's where the Townsley live now, because that's the site of the oldest Apple Valley, one of the old Apple Valley schoolhouses.
Dot and Preston.
Yeah, Dot Preston's. Mm-hmm. And then the other schoolhouse, that was what I call a peripatetic schoolhouse, was a Steady Lane one. At first, they didn't have a schoolhouse. They moved the pupils instead of the houses. So they had a schoolhouse. They had a school in a private home up by Snake Rock, up where the Doyle place is. Probably not that house, but a house on that location. Then they moved back down by the creamery near where Fred Rice lives. And they moved the children down to the dwelling house there. And then they moved all the children up to about opposite, somewhere near opposite where Emery and Mary Priscilla Howes live. And that one burned down. I don't know if it was a dwelling house or a schoolhouse, didn't seem to say. But then they finally decided they'd have to have a schoolhouse. So they built one. And it lasted until 1851. And then it was replaced by another one, which they lived there, and that was in that same location across from Emery and Mary Priscilla. And except the road's been widened, so it doesn't, not exact. The first one lasted until 1851, and that was replaced by one that stood there until 1883. And then they consolidated this district, the Cape Street and the